Revolution Games is a new publisher that recently released its first game, which is Washington's Crossing, a game for 2 players that covers the winter campaign of 1776 and 1777 of the American Revolution. A side will be the British, the other side will be the American, of course. This is a game that is not particularly complicated in terms of rules, and the rulebook is pretty accessible, yet it does manage to pack a very good amount of detail and historical feel through the tables that are used to resolve the actions in the game. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that, of how that works. It is a game for serious players, mainly because it takes quite a bit to play, and because there is bookkeeping, and because there are some procedures that just require some commitment to the art and craft of playing a word game. Anyways, let me show you the general concepts behind the game, and then I will tell you my impressions about the way in which the game plays. This is the map for the game. It is printed on paper, and I placed it on a magnetic board here. I played the game using a magnetic set, so I'm going to show you the game in that fashion. The map represents the area where the action took place, and I think the map just looks gorgeous. I like the colors, I like the graphics. Of course, I know that the action took place in winter, so things probably weren't nearly as green, and you see them here. But, well, first, I just like the map. I just find it very pleasant as is. And then it is also very functional, because, of course, these colors allow you to tell the terrain feature from one another very easily. And I don't think that necessarily a map has to be a satellite photograph of the action as it took place. I think this map is both pleasing and functional, so I'm happy with it. Here you see a general view of the game as setup with the American units on this side, and several units are ready to cross the Delaware, and then you have English units scattered around on this side of the map. Important locations are Philadelphia for the American player and Amboy for the English player. Actually, these locations are also important for the opposing side, because each side is trying to take control of the main location belonging to the opposing player. You will place on the board the counters that indicate the position of your leaders. There are different types of leaders, commanding leaders and non-commanding leaders. Then, well, you also have both. But talking about the leaders, leaders all have an activation number. This is the number of points that it costs to activate that leader. Leaders also have a quality rating at the bottom left corner of the counters. That number is used during movement and combat. And then some leaders have 2 values on the right side of the counter. These leaders are commanding leaders. And that is the number of leaders that the leader can activate in command points, in activation points, meaning that Green could activate Mercer and could activate 4 of the leaders that have an activation rating of 1. Or he could activate that guy and 1 of the leader that has an activation value of 4. It can be split in different ways. Also, here you have another number that is the radius in terms of movement points, and that indicates the distance at which the activated leader can be from the activating leader in order to be able to benefit from those action points. Each turn you receive a certain amount of activation points that can be saved from turn to turn, and you use those activation points either just to activate lonely leaders or to activate commanding leaders that in turn will lend activation points to other leaders. So sometimes you will be forced to use your activation points on single leaders. Some of the times, in many cases actually, you will want to exploit your chain of command and use your commanding leaders to give activation points to other units. Each leader controls a certain number of men, and that number is recorded on this player aid, and there is one player aid like this for each player. The player aid includes a series of tracks, 1 for each player, and you will use these numerical counters here to keep track of the number of men that are controlled by each leader. For example, right now Griffin controls 450 men, and there are 300 men in the detachment 4. This track is also where you will record the level of fatigue of your units. Units will accumulate fatigue when moving, when attacking, when defending. Other actions also may give fatigue to your units, and there are ways in which you will recover from fatigue, but of course that means that you're not acting otherwise. A turn starts with a roll to determine the weather for that turn. Weather will affect several things during the turn. Then the American player rolls to see if he's able to launch a raid against the opponent. There is a procedure to resolve that, and if the raid does happen is successful, then the raid may inflict fatigue on the opponent, may inflict damages. It is a way to disrupt the opponent. Players may receive reinforcements, and then you have an American command phase and an American action phase that later are followed by a British command and British action phase. These are the same sequence for the two players. During the command phase, the active player spends activation points to activate units, and then the activated leaders will move and perform attacks. At the end of this phase, then the active player can conduct all prepared attacks, that are attacks that you launch against enemies that were adjacent to your units at the beginning of the phase, and that means these are attacks in which the attacker is spending all of his movement points just to declare the attack. When you are moving, you have to look first at the movement matrix, because the amount of movement points that each leader receives may change from turn to turn. You roll a die, which is modified by these factors here, and then you cross-reference the modified result with the quality rating of the leader, and you find out the number of movement points that that leader receives for that turn. But then also the movement cost of different types of terrain will change in different phases of the game. This is the column that you look at during rain turns, and for other types of weather you look at this column for turns between December 25th and January 3rd. And you look at these other column here for the later turns in the game from January 4th on. As you can see, this is when things freeze over, and for example here you can then cross ferries without any penalties. You can cross major rivers. Some types of terrain do not change, but other types of terrain are affected by weather. So you also have to take this into account. And then of course leaders that are activated can move, spending their movement points depending on the movement costs for that turn. Then leaders that moved adjacent to enemies can attack those enemies. If you still have a movement point and you decide to spend it, then you can launch a hasty attack. If your leader still has 3 movement points and decides to spend them, then the leader launches a normal attack. These are important things because they will result in different modifiers on the combat tables. Also, if you launch a hasty attack, the opponent does not have a chance to react, but prepared attacks and normal attacks will give the opponent a chance to react. Meaning, if the opponent has a leader that is within 4 hexes from the hex that you are attacking, then the leader may roll to see if he can activate and join the fight. So there is a disadvantage when you're launching a hasty attack because you have a penalty, but at least the opponent doesn't have the opportunity of bringing in last-minute reinforcements. To resolve an attack, you have first to look at several tables. First, you will find a modifier based on the attacker to defender ratio, and this is the ratio between the size of the units involved in combat, and you will find a modifier that later will be applied to the combat results table. Then you have a surprise table that may add other modifiers. First you have to roll on this table, and in order to roll on this table you have to take into account these other modifiers. There are modifiers that modify the roll that will give you the modifier for this table. So you take these modifiers into account, you roll on the surprise table, and you may have modifiers for the combat result table, and also you may have a modifier in the amount of casualties that the attacker receives, and this is the modification in percentage, plus 15% or minus 15%, minus 5, plus 5. Then you have other modifiers that may be based on weather. You have a -1 for hasty attack, a negative modifications for the fatigue of the attacker, positive modification for the attacker if the defender is fatigued. You combine together all of the modifiers from these tables here, and Finally, you roll on this table, on the combat results table. You cross-reference the modified result with the quality rating of the leader, and you will find the result of the battle, which will be the percentage of casualties that the attacker and the defender will have to take. Also, further effects may take place. An R, for example, indicates that that side retreats. You may have a side that is forced to retreat and to become disordered, to retreat and rout. They're just different effects that are combined here. So definitely there are several passages that you have to go through each time that you declare an attack. And then there are other factors that need to be taken into account. There are specific rules during movement about crossing rivers using ferries. There are rules about historical events, organization of the armies throughout the game, arrival of new leaders, desertion and disease for the British player. That will take a toll on the British side, but not nearly as severe a toll as the American player will have to suffer at the end of the enlistment, at the end of the year, when a large number of American soldiers are just going to disappear from the map. These are all elements that are brought in the design and that definitely increase the historical quality of the game. At the end of the game, victory will be determined by victory points. Victory points are gained through control of specific locations on the map, capture of enemy leaders, and also throughout the game by winning large battles in which you inflicted a lot of damage on the opponent and you took a considerably lower amount of damage yourself. You put together all of those points and you determine who the winner is. Generally speaking, this is a game that I enjoyed quite a bit. I found it to be a truly immersive experience, not, let's say, a blast, not an action-packed Hollywood movie about the campaign, but I don't know that it should be in any case that way. This is a game that emphasizes maneuver, emphasizes fatigue, emphasizes the problems that come from terrain and weather, and so it is a game where very often you have to work to build up a situation that then pays off. You have to figure out a way to attack when you're not as fatigued as the opponent, and possibly when the opponent is exhausted, using terrain of your choosing. You have to work around all of these factors, which is not always easy. So that is to say that yes, you have moments in which the game may proceed slowly because of the procedures that you have to complete at each step of the turn, but also because sometimes you need to rest and you need to make sure that again your men are ready to fight. So it is a game, I think, that requires a certain level of commitment because the game takes long to play because of all the procedures and the die rolling that you have to do and the bookkeeping and keeping track of the number of men in each unit. But of course there's an advantage in this. The experience feels very rich, very thematic. I mean, you can keep track of the exact number of people in your units and you can move those men around and switch them and detach them and combine units. The range of options that this gives you is really great, it's fascinating, and of course it makes up for the extra procedures that you have to follow in order to be able to execute all of these things. This is a game that has a considerable amount of fog of war. You're not supposed to know what is in the stacks of the opponent, so apparently this should not be very solitaire friendly, but actually I played the game solitaire and I really enjoyed it that way because you have variable movement allowance for your leaders, variable movement costs for terrain, you have variable modifiers that will be used from battle to battle, and these things combined were really enough to give me a lot of uncertainty, enough uncertainty that the game did not feel mechanic. I was able to surprise myself when I was playing one of the two sides and the side wasn't really working the way I expected it to. So I think I find this game to be absolutely solitaire friendly. If you're playing it face to face and you're playing it also with the fog of war, even better for you. But bottom line is that this is a game that I found very enjoyable, that I really enjoyed playing. Not a game for a casual gamer, not a game probably for a beginning war gamer. It requires not experience in terms of knowing concepts from war gaming or from other games, but it requires a certain training, a certain taste for, again, for the procedures and the scope and the breadth of a game that lasts this long and has this level of detail. It is a game that may takes a while before it shows you all that it has to offer, but when that happens, this is a game that does have a lot to offer.